The biggest thing holding you back is not the obstacle in front of you. It's the version of yourself you've created in your own mind. Two people can walk into the exact same room and live with completely different outcomes. Not because one is more talented, but because they see themselves differently. One of the most powerful examples is found in the story of the 12 spies. When Moses sent 12 spies into the promised land, they all saw the same thing, the same land, the same fortified cities, and the same giants. Yet they didn't all come back with the same conclusion. 10 of the spies said, "We seem like grasshoppers in our own eyes." What strikes me every time I read that passage is that they didn't just describe the giants, they also described themselves. Before they were defeated physically, they had already been defeated in their minds. And I think many of us do the same thing. We look at opportunities and think, "I'm not qualified enough, I'm not confident enough, I'm not experienced enough." Not necessarily because those things are true, but because somehow along the way, we've started seeing ourselves as grasshoppers. Joshua and Caleb saw the same land, same giants, and same obstacles, yet they reached a completely different conclusion. The difference isn't what they saw, it is how they saw themselves in light of what God had already said. That's why shrinking isn't primarily about your circumstances. It's about how you see yourself, because how you see yourself determines how you see the giants. But before we continue, if you're new here, welcome. I'm Winnie Marita from Your Mind is the Limit community, where we challenge limiting beliefs and grow from the inside out. If this kind of content resonates with you, consider subscribing and become a part of this community. Now back to the video. Most of us don't call it having a grasshopper mindset, we call it shrinking. Shrinking is not about becoming physically smaller, it's about making yourself smaller on the inside. It's when you constantly hold back parts of yourself because somehow along the way you learned it was safer. Safer to stay quiet than speak up, safer to blend in than stand out, or safer to lower your expectations than risk disappointment. Over time, you begin to see yourself through the lens of that smaller version of yourself. Not because you have nothing to offer, but because you've convinced yourself it is better if you stay small. The truth is, shrinking doesn't happen all of a sudden. It shows up in everyday moments. It looks like brushing off achievements. When someone compliments you and says something like, "That was a good job," you say, "It was not a big deal," instead of simply accepting it by saying thank you. Without realizing it, you make yourself seem smaller than you really are. Another example in everyday moment is staying silent even when you have something valuable to say. Whether you're in a meeting, having a conversation, or in a relationship, you hold back because you are afraid of being judged, rejected, or saying the wrong thing. Sometimes you hide parts of you just to fit in. You keep your talents to yourself, tone down your personality, and agree with people even when you don't, just because you're afraid of standing out. Gradually, you stop being yourself and you start becoming who you think other people want you to be. So where does this grasshopper mindset actually come from? I don't think the Israelites' biggest problem was the giants. The biggest problem is that they forgot who they were. Before they talked about the size of the giants, they talked about the size of themselves, and they came to a conclusion that they seemed like grasshoppers. They weren't just former slaves wandering in the wilderness. They were God's chosen people. And he had already proven his faithfulness by delivering them from Egypt and promising them the land. But instead of seeing themselves through God's promises, they saw themselves through the size of the giants. The moment you stop defining yourself by what God says about you and begin to define yourself by your circumstances, your fears, your past, or other people's opinions, you'll naturally begin to shrink because you'll never consistently live beyond your identity and how you see yourself. The second one is perspective. Your perspective is the lens through which you interpret the world, and that lens is shaped by how you see yourself. If you see yourself as a grasshopper, every opportunity starts looking like a giant. Imagine you walk into a networking event. Everyone seems more successful, more confident, and more accomplished than you. Instead of introducing yourself, you quietly stand in the corner, hoping no one notices you. Not because nobody wants to talk to you, but because you've already convinced yourself that you have nothing valuable to offer. Someone else walks into that exact same room and sees an opportunity where you saw intimidation. The room didn't change and the people didn't change either. The only thing that changed was the perspective those two people had. The third thing is fear. Specifically, fear of being seen. If you already believe you're not good enough, being seen feels dangerous. You don't want people to notice your mistakes or question your abilities. So instead of stepping forward, you step back. Instead of speaking up, you stay quiet. And instead of taking the opportunity, you convince yourself you're not ready. The irony is that when you shrink, you might think you're protecting yourself, but the reality is that it is the very thing that's keeping you stuck. That's exactly what happened with the 10 spies. They didn't just fear the giants, they feared what would happen if they faced them. But fear wasn't the root problem, it was the result of believing they were grasshoppers. And I wonder how often we do the same thing. How many opportunities have we walked away from, not because we are incapable, but because being seen felt too risky? So how do we eliminate this grasshopper mindset? The first step is to identify where you're shrinking. Take an honest look at your life and identify areas in your life where you're shrinking. And remember, awareness is not about judging yourself, it's about seeing the patterns in your life. The second step is take it to God. Once you've identified where you're shrinking, take it to God in prayer. One of my favorite prayers has become, God, show me who I am and help me to see myself the way you see me. Because shrinking begins when you believe the wrong story about yourself. Ask Him to reveal the lies you've been believing about yourself. Maybe you've believed that you're not enough, not capable enough, or not worthy enough. Then ask Him to help you see yourself the way He sees you. The 10 spies allowed the giants to define who they were, but Joshua and Caleb allowed God's promise to define them. And even for us, every day we have the same choice. The third and the last step is to practice being seen. Once you begin changing the way you see yourself, your actions need to reflect that new identity. Real change doesn't happen by waiting until you feel confident. Speak up, share those ideas, apply for that opportunity, post that video. Take the first step you've been avoiding. Joshua and Caleb still had to walk into the land. Confidence didn't replace action, it produced it. Not because you're fearless, but because every time you refuse to shrink, you teach your mind something new. You prove to yourself that being seen isn't as dangerous as you once believed. And over time, those small acts of courage begin to reshape how you see yourself. As I close, I want you to remember this. You are not born shrinking. It's not who you are, and it's not your personality. It's a learned behavior that has developed over time because shrinking at some point felt safer than being seen. The good news is that what has been learned can also be unlearned. The giants in your life may not disappear overnight. Stop measuring yourself by the size of the giants. Start measuring yourself by who God says you are. Because the greatest battle isn't always against the giant in front of you. It's against the grasshopper you've become in your own eyes. Change that version and the giants begin to look different. If you've made it this far, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I'll see you in the next episode.